There's a moment in everyone's life when they have to choose: stay silent and stay safe, or speak up and risk everything. For Sarah Williams, that moment came on an ordinary Tuesday night when a billionaire made the biggest mistake of his life. He assumed she couldn't understand him. You know that feeling when you're so tired that your bones ache? When you've smiled so much your face hurts, but none of those smiles were real. That's how Sarah Williams felt every single night as she pushed through the heavy brass doors of the Royal Table, one of London's most exclusive restaurants. 24 years old. That's all she was. 24, and already she felt ancient. The Royal Table wasn't just any restaurant. This was where billionaires celebrated deals, where celebrities hid in corner booths, where the wine list cost more than most people's monthly rent. The chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars. The silverware gleamed. Everything was perfect, polished, pristine. Everything except the staff. Sarah would tie her dark hair back into a tight bun, slip on her black uniform, and become invisible. That's what they wanted, really. The management, the customers, everyone. They wanted ghosts who could carry plates and pour wine and clear tables without ever being seen. Without ever being human. Sarah, table 7 needs water. Now. That was Marcus, the floor manager. He had a way of saying her name that made it sound like an insult. Sarah nodded, grabbed the crystal pitcher, and moved through the dining room like a shadow. She'd learned not to make eye contact. Not to speak unless spoken to. Not to exist, really, except as a pair of hands that brought food and took away empty plates. But here's what nobody knew. Every morning, before her shift, Sarah sat in lecture halls at London University. She studied linguistics, the science of language, the art of communication, the beautiful complexity of how humans connect. While her coworkers thought she was just another struggling waitress, Sarah was fluent in French, fluent in Spanish, fluent in Mandarin Chinese, and especially fluent in Japanese. 3 years earlier, Sarah had won a scholarship. A full year in Tokyo, studying at one of Japan's most prestigious language institutes. She still remembered the first time she stepped off the plane, the way the city hummed with energy, the way the language felt in her mouth, sharp and soft at the same time, endlessly polite but capable of expressing the deepest emotions. She'd lived with a Japanese host family. She'd studied calligraphy. She'd learned not just words, but culture. The tiny bow of respect, the layers of formality, the unspoken rules that governed every interaction. By the time she came back to London, Sarah didn't just speak Japanese. She understood it. She felt it. But at the royal table, none of that mattered. Sarah, you missed a spot on table 12. Sarah, the customer at table 5 says his water is too cold. Sarah, you need to work faster. She was just a waitress. Just a girl who served the rich and cleaned up their messes and absorbed their complaints with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Some nights were worse than others. Some nights, her co-worker Jennifer would accidentally bump into her, sending plates clattering. Some nights, Marcus would change her schedule at the last minute, making her miss important study sessions. Some nights, customers would snap their fingers at her like she was a dog, or ignore her completely when she asked if they needed anything else. Sarah took it all. She needed this job. The scholarship had covered tuition, but it didn't cover rent in East London, didn't cover food, didn't cover the textbooks that cost a fortune. So she smiled and nodded and swallowed her dignity shift after shift after shift. Until that Tuesday night. It started like any other evening. The restaurant filled up around 7. The usual crowd, businessmen in suits that cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe, women dripping in diamonds, everyone speaking in that particular tone of voice that comes with never having to check a price tag. Sarah was carrying a tray of champagne glasses when she heard the shift in the room's energy. You know how sometimes you can feel when something important walks in? The air changes. Conversations drop to whispers. Even the lighting seems different. She looked up. The man entering the restaurant was Japanese, probably in his late 50s, with silver-streaked black hair and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile decades ago. His suit was impeccable, not just expensive, but powerful. The kind of suit that says, I own things. I own companies. Maybe I own you. 3 assistants trailed behind him, all younger, all looking nervous. The restaurant manager, Mr. Peterson, who usually treated everyone like dirt, practically sprinted across the room, bowing and scraping and falling over himself to welcome this man. Sarah caught fragments of conversation. Mr. Yamamoto, such an honor. Your usual table, anything you need. Yamamoto. She knew that name. Everyone in business knew that name. Takashi Yamamoto, founder of Yamamoto Industries, one of the largest tech conglomerates in Asia. Net worth? Probably more than some countries. Reputation? Cold. Demanding. Ruthless. The kind of man who fired executives before breakfast and bought companies before lunch. And he was being seated in her section. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She wanted to ask Marcus to give the table to someone else, but she knew better. Refusing a table like this could get her fired, and she couldn't afford that. Not 3 months before graduation. Not when she was this close to escaping this life forever. So she took a breath, picked up her order pad, and walked over to table 7. Good evening, gentlemen, she said in English, keeping her voice steady and professional. Welcome to the royal table. May I start you with something to drink? Yamamoto didn't even look at her. He was studying the menu, his face expressionless. One of his assistants, a younger man with nervous eyes, ordered for the group. Wine. Expensive wine. The kind Sarah had to fetch from the special cellar. She brought the bottle, showed the label, poured a small amount for Yamamoto to taste. He sipped it, nodded once, and went back to ignoring her existence. Sarah poured for everyone else, her hands steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. That's when it happened. As she poured the last glass, a single drop of water from the ice bucket, just one tiny drop, fell onto Yamamoto's sleeve. It was barely visible. It would dry in seconds. But Sarah saw his entire body go rigid. I apologize, sir, she said immediately, reaching for a napkin. Let me. He jerked his arm away from her like she'd burned him. And then he spoke. Not in English. In Japanese. Fast, sharp, angry Japanese. And he had no idea she could understand every single word. Ignorant girl, he said to his assistants, his voice dripping with contempt. These British workers are so careless. Look at her, probably didn't even finish school. This is what happens when restaurants hire people with no intelligence, no breeding. She's lucky I don't have her fired right now. His assistants murmured agreement, one of them chuckling softly. Sarah stood there, frozen, the napkin in her hand, the practiced smile still on her face. But inside, something was cracking. Something that had been bending and bending for years under the weight of disrespect, rudeness, and casual cruelty. Yamamoto continued, still looking at his colleagues, still assuming Sarah was too stupid to understand. She probably thinks we're complimenting her. These people are like furniture. Useful, but mindless. You point, they fetch. That's all they're capable of. The words hit her like slaps. Not because they were new. She'd heard worse from customers, felt worse from the way people treated her. But because he said it in Japanese. In the language she loved. In the language that had opened up entire worlds to her. In the language she'd spent a year of her life mastering with respect and dedication. He was using something beautiful to say something ugly. And he thought she was too beneath him to even understand the insult. Sarah felt her heart pounding. Felt heat rising in her chest. Felt every tired muscle, every swallowed complaint, every ignored slight from every shift she'd ever worked suddenly gathering into a single point of white-hot clarity. She thought about walking away, about staying quiet, about being invisible one more time. But then she thought about her host family in Tokyo, about the teachers who taught her that language was about honor and connection, about the years she'd spent learning that every person deserved respect, regardless of their station. And she thought, no, not tonight. Not anymore. Sarah straightened her spine. She looked directly at Takashi Yamamoto. And in perfect, formal, absolutely flawless Japanese, she spoke. The words that came out of her mouth would change everything, The Japanese that came out of Sarah Williams' mouth was not the casual Japanese you'd learn from an app or pick up from anime. This was formal, precise. The kind of Japanese that demonstrated not just fluency, but deep cultural understanding. The kind that showed years of study and genuine respect for the language. Yamamoto-san, Sarah began, her voice calm but carrying across the suddenly silent corner of the restaurant. With the greatest respect, I must inform you that I understood every word you just said. You know that moment in a movie when the music stops? When everything freezes and the whole world seems to hold its breath. That's what happened at table 7. Yamamoto's head snapped up. His eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that had stared down corporate rivals and government officials, went wide with shock. His assistants froze, wine glasses halfway to their lips. Even a couple at the next table stopped eating, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. But Sarah wasn't done. You called me ignorant, she continued in Japanese, her tone remaining respectful but firm. You assumed I hadn't finished school. You compared me to furniture, mindless and useful only for taking orders. She paused, letting her words sink in. In the corner of her eye, she could see Marcus rushing over, his face red with panic. Mr. Peterson was rising from his desk. But Sarah kept her gaze locked on Yamamoto. I want you to know, she said, that I am 3 months away from graduating with honors from London University, where I study linguistics. I am fluent in 5 languages. I spent a year in Tokyo on a Daiwa scholarship living with a family in Setagaya, studying at the Japan Institute of Language and Culture. I learned your language not because I had to, but because I loved it. Because I respected it. Because I believed that language was a bridge between human beings. Her voice didn't shake. Not once. This wasn't anger, it was something deeper. Something that had been building for years. You used that beautiful language, a language built on concepts of respect and honor, to insult someone you assumed was beneath you. And you did it believing I was too stupid to understand. But here is what you failed to understand, Yamamoto-san. Intelligence and worth are not determined by job titles. Dignity is not measured by wealth. And the person serving your wine might know more than you could ever imagine. The silence in the restaurant was absolute now. Other diners had turned to watch. The kitchen staff had crept to the doorway. Everyone understood that something profound was happening, even if most of them couldn't understand the words. Sarah reached into her apron and pulled out her order pad. She set it gently on the table. I have tolerated disrespect from customers for 3 years, she said, switching back to English now so everyone could hear. I have smiled through insults. I have accepted being treated as invisible, as less than human because I needed this job. But I don't need it enough to accept being degraded in any language. She looked at Marcus, who had finally reached the table, his mouth opening to protest. I quit, Sarah said simply. Effective immediately. Then she did something extraordinary. She turned back to Yamamoto and, in Japanese once more, she added, also, Yamamoto-san, you made a grammatical error when you spoke. You used bakana as an adjective, but in that sentence structure, you should have used bakarashii. It's a common mistake, even for native speakers, but I thought you should know. And with that, with perfect politeness, with devastating precision, Sarah Williams bowed once, turned on her heel, and walked toward the staff room. Her legs were shaking. Her heart was hammering so hard, she thought it might burst through her chest. She'd just quit her job. She'd just humiliated one of the most powerful men in Asia in front of a room full of witnesses. She'd just destroyed whatever reference she might have hoped for, probably blacklisted herself from half the restaurants in London. But God, it felt good. She was grabbing her coat from her locker when she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, quick footsteps. She turned, expecting Marcus coming to yell at her, or maybe security coming to escort her out. It was Yamamoto. He stood in the doorway of the staff room, a place men like him never entered, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. His assistants hovered behind him, looking absolutely terrified. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Yamamoto did something Sarah never expected. He bowed. Not a slight nod, but a real bow, the kind that showed genuine respect. Miss Williams, he said in English, though his accent was thick. Please. I would like to speak with you. Sarah's instinct was to refuse, to walk out, to leave this entire nightmare behind her. But something in his voice stopped her. Something that sounded almost like humility. 5 minutes, she said. They sat in the break room, a dingy space with flickering lights and a coffee machine that never worked properly. Yamamoto looked absurdly out of place in his expensive suit, sitting on a plastic chair that probably cost £5. I owe you an apology, he began, and even his assistants looked shocked at those words. What I said was inexcusable. There is no justification. I spoke cruelly, and I spoke without thinking, and I assumed wrongly. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I have built my entire life on the idea that I am the smartest person in any room, he continued. I have let my success make me arrogant. Tonight, you showed me that I am not only wrong, but that my arrogance has made me small. Sarah watched him carefully. She'd learned in Tokyo that Japanese business culture took apologies seriously. This wasn't just words. This was a man acknowledging a genuine failure. Why did you learn Japanese? Yamamoto asked suddenly. Sarah thought about the question. Because when I was 19, I read a poem by Matsuo Basho in translation. It was beautiful in English, but I felt like I was only getting half of it. I wanted to understand the whole thing. So I started studying. And the more I learned, the more I realized that language wasn't just about words, it was about entire ways of seeing the world. Yamamoto nodded slowly. You studied for 1 year in Tokyo? Yes. With the Ikeda family in Setagaya. They treated me like a daughter. They taught me that respect costs nothing, but means everything. Something passed across Yamamoto's face then. Not quite a smile, but close. Miss Williams, he said. I have a proposition for you. Sarah almost laughed. I'm not interested in. I need someone like you in my company, he interrupted. Someone who understands multiple cultures. Someone who can navigate between worlds. Someone who is not afraid to speak truth to power. He leaned forward. I will pay you 3 times what you were making here. I will give you flexible hours so you can finish your degree. And I will create a scholarship fund in your name for language students who cannot afford to study abroad. Sarah stared at him. Why would you do that? Because tonight you taught me something I should have learned decades ago, Yamamoto said quietly. That the people we overlook are often the ones we should be learning from. That arrogance is not strength. And that true intelligence means recognizing intelligence in others, no matter where you find it. He stood up, pulled a business card from his pocket, and placed it on the table between them. Think about it, he said. You have my personal number. Call me when you decide. And then he was gone, his assistants scrambling after him, leaving Sarah alone in the break room with a business card that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 3 years later, Sarah Williams stood in front of 200 students at London University, giving a guest lecture on cross-cultural communication. She wore a professional suit now, not expensive, but well-made. On her lapel was a small pin, the logo for the Yamamoto Williams Scholarship Fund, which had sent 47 students abroad to study languages in the past 3 years. She'd taken the job, of course, but on her terms. Respect, flexibility, and most importantly, the scholarship fund. Yamamoto had agreed to everything. Working for him had been challenging. He was still demanding, still intense, but he'd changed. He listened now. He asked questions. He treated his staff like human beings instead of tools. And once a month, without fail, Yamamoto would call Sarah into his office and ask her to teach him something new. A phrase in French, a concept in Spanish, the cultural context behind a business negotiation. I spent 60 years thinking I knew everything, he told her once. You showed me in 5 minutes that I knew nothing. That was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Now, looking out at the sea of students, some wealthy, some struggling, all of them hungry to learn, Sarah thought about that night at the royal table, about the moment she'd had to choose between silence and truth. The world will try to make you invisible, she told the students. Especially if you're young, or if you work in service, or if you don't fit someone's idea of what intelligence looks like. People will underestimate you. They'll talk over you. They'll assume you don't understand. She paused, remembering the weight of the champagne tray, the ache in her feet, the practiced smile that had hidden so much. But here's what I learned, she continued. Your worth is not determined by how others see you. Your intelligence is not measured by your job title. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let the world see who you really are. A hand went up in the back row. A young woman, maybe 19, with tired eyes that Sarah recognized. Miss Williams, the student asked, what if speaking up costs you everything? Sarah smiled.
A real smile this time.
One that reached her eyes. Then you find out what you're made of, she said. And sometimes, just sometimes, you discover that the thing you thought would cost you everything actually gives you everything back, just in a different form. After the lecture, Sarah walked through campus as the sun set over London. Her phone buzzed. A text from Yamamoto. Thank you for the cultural brief on the Paris negotiations. You were right about the formal address. The deal closed. She smiled and typed back. Glad I could help. P.S. You made another grammatical error in your last email. I've attached corrections. A moment later. You will never let me forget that first night, will you? Never, Sarah replied. It's my job to keep you humble. And you do it well. Dinner next week? I want to hear about your new students. Sarah looked up at the university buildings, thought about the scholarship students currently studying in Tokyo, Beijing, Madrid, Paris. Thought about the young waitress she'd been just 3 years ago, invisible and exhausted but carrying entire worlds inside her. Dinner sounds good, she typed. But I'm choosing the restaurant this time. Because that was the thing about finding your voice. Once you used it, really used it, despite the fear and the risk and the cost, you could never go back to being silent.
And you wouldn't want to.
Sarah Williams had been invisible for so long. But invisibility, she'd learned, was never about who she was. It was only about who was willing to see.
And now?
Now she made sure everyone saw. Not just her, but all the quiet people carrying hidden strength. All the underestimated ones. All the invisible ones who were just waiting for their moment to speak. Because in the end, that's what her story proved. That one brave moment can change everything. That the people serving your coffee, or cleaning your office, or standing behind a counter might be brilliant and complex and capable of extraordinary things. That worth is inherent, not assigned. That respect is owed to everyone, not earned through status. And that sometimes the greatest teachers come from the most unexpected places, if only we're willing to see them. Sarah walked home as the stars came out over London, knowing that somewhere tonight, another young person was choosing between silence and truth. Another invisible person was deciding whether to let the world see them. And she hoped, she hoped they chose to speak. Because the world needed their voices. It always had.